Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. I do want to start in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, because we know what was at stake in the Alabama LSU game. Both teams, come in at 6-2. Both teams know that a third loss in this game essentially eliminates them from the college football playoff race. Well, the good thing is we don't even have to debate over who's better, who's this, who's that, because Alabama, with the statement victory, final score 42-13. Let me say this. We could start in either side. I do want to give Alabama the credit they deserve and begin with them, but I'll also stick around for LSU because I am starting to wonder, like, is Brian Kelly, are we sure that he is cut out for the LSU job and the SEC in general? But before we get to that, let's go ahead and dive in. Alabama, again, a 42-13 victory. And listen, we got to give this team and this program so much credit, okay? Because we know what was said about Alabama throughout really most of October, right? You lose to Vandy. We don't have to go through the whole thing, but you lose to Vandy, ugly win against South Carolina. You lose to Tennessee. You do beat up Missouri pretty good prior to the bye. But at the same time, we all know that a win against a beat-up Missouri team at home, that isn't going to calm anyone's fears. And by the way, that's not a criticism of Alabama fans. That's everybody on the national scale saying, how good is Bama? How good are they? Are they really a contender? Are they taking a step back under Kalen DeBoer? You needed a statement win against a marquee opponent, and that's exactly what you got. First off, let's start with this. Jaylen Milroe. What a performance for a second straight year against LSU. Yeah, I broke out the Al Bundy gif because 4 touchdowns in a single game for the second straight year. It's Al Bundy and Jaylen Milroe, and that's basically it, okay? Because Jaylen Milroe, unbelievable performance. And listen, let me say this. I think this game reestablished Jaylen Milroe in college football truly is one of one, okay? And I'm not saying he's going to win the Heisman or he should be the number 1 pick or anything like that, but you get that kid, especially fully healthy. It is hard to think of a more dynamic player and a guy that changes the game more than Jaylen Milroe. It is still amazing to me that in SEC games against SEC opponents, this guy looks like another level of an athlete, even from all the great players on the field, okay? And I think it's interesting. I think it's worth noting. Jaylen Milroe, his 2 best games of the year were against Georgia off of a bye and LSU off of a bye. So you get him healthy, you get him close to full strength as you can be in November, and you are getting an absolute difference maker. Well, that's what we saw on Saturday night. Not only those 4 rushing touchdowns, 185 yards rushing, 15 yards per carry. He was unbelievable. By the way, as you see on the bottom of the screen, make sure that you're following our Torres on Bama Twitter account, all things Alabama. Appreciate everybody's support who is already following that page. But to get back to the game, Jaylen Milroe was unbelievable. But here's the thing. I thought it was everything else. It was everybody else, and it was a statement, and it was an attitude that Alabama played with. Okay, remember, Alabama comes into this game. We're trying to figure out, okay, how tough are they? Are they mean? Are they this? Are they that? Well, listen, bottom line is over 300 yards of rush offense in this game. Jaylen Milroe basically didn't have to pass the football because they just beat up LSU at the line of scrimmage. So over 300 yards rushing for Alabama. The defense, I thought, was phenomenal. I know the stats would tell you something else, but LSU was basically in 2-minute offense, drop back offense the entire second half, okay? And by the way, the one moment where it felt like LSU was threatening for half a second, that series to open the second half, what ends up happening? They get in the red zone. Next thing you know, LSU drops back. Grant Nussmeier throws the interception, and it was basically ball game from there. So the defense steps up. The offense steps up. Here's the other thing. I know that you look at the penalty yardage, 7 penalties, 75 yards, but at the same time, they weren't crippling penalties. They weren't crushing penalties. And I just think that attitude that we kind of questioned a few weeks ago, were guys getting away with stuff? Were they doing dumb things? You had the Kendrick Law penalty against Tennessee. You had the Malachi Moore thing against Vandy a few weeks ago. It feels like it's cleaned up, and that felt like vintage Alabama. You know what that felt like? That felt like 2012 joyless murder ball all over again, okay? We're going to run the ball right at him. We're going to beat the crap out of him, and we are good to go. And when I think about the bigger picture for Alabama, what stands out to me, this game, to me, maybe you feel differently. It changes everything that we think about Alabama. Because on the one hand, you go back, and I do think a lot of the frustration that we all had with Alabama, because listen, when I say we all hold Alabama to a standard. They have been the best program in college football for the last 15 years, so we hold them to a very high standard, okay? But the frustration that we had with Alabama, I think we're starting to realize it just turns out there's a lot of really good teams in the SEC this year, okay? Now, listen, you never want to lose to Vandy. I get it. I'm not excusing it, but let's also call a spade a spade. This ain't your grandpa's Vandy team. This ain't the 2023 Vandy team, okay? They can play with and they can beat good teams in this league, especially if you show up. And oh, by the way, at that moment in time, we didn't even realize how good they were. Remember, Texas barely won at Vanderbilt, okay? So there's that. Then Alabama plays South Carolina. We freak out. Well, it turns out South Carolina's got freaks on the defensive line. Kyle Kennard, Dylan Stewart. Dylan Stewart, by the way, there was a story that he's going to get paid, probably close to $1.5 million next year at NIL. That's already the asking price. So it just shows you South Carolina's got real difference makers on the defensive front. And then Tennessee's really good defensively. And guess what? In the fourth quarter in Knoxville at Neyland Stadium, you had a chance to win that game. So I'm not excusing Alabama. What I am saying is it was probably never as bad as we thought, but also this game, in my opinion, changes everything from the playoff perspective. Because at the end of the day, the goal at Alabama is always to compete at the highest level, whether that's in a 12-team playoff, a 4-team playoff, the BCS era, whatever. Well, you look at college football. You look at this year. I'm here to tell you, Alabama now is 7-2. They ain't losing one of their last three. I'm sorry. If something freaky happens and they lose one of their last three and they're out of the playoff, they'll have nobody to blame but themselves because they are through the hard part of the schedule. They did beat, or excuse me, they've done what they have to do. Final three, Mercer at home this week. Yeah, I think that's probably a victory. At Oklahoma, I'm sorry. I know it's a tough place to play. Oklahoma's a mess right now, okay? Oklahoma is a freaking mess. That's no disrespect. It's just a reality. And then he closed with Auburn, who's obviously an even bigger mess. And so it's just funny to me because we freaked out so much about Alabama. They're going to be 10-2. Now, again, you don't want to lose to Vandy. I'm not trying to excuse Bama losing some and struggling in the middle of the year. But you're 10-2, and I'm just here to tell you, I know there's a million different college football playoff scenarios, and this could happen, and that could happen, and what about this, and what about that? If Alabama's 10-2, they're getting in the college football playoff. Because think about it. Now, the SEC tiebreak scenario, don't even get me started on the SEC championships. I don't know what it would take for Alabama to get to Atlanta. But at the same time, the goal in the preseason was to make the playoff. They're going to get in at 10-2. They're going to get in at 10-2, and it's not brand bias or anything like that. Because remember, if Georgia's in the mix at 10-2, Alabama has a head-to-head win over Georgia. Alabama is going to get in over Georgia if it comes down to the head-to-head. By the way, LSU, very likely, very possible, could finish 10-2 as well. Well, guess what? Or 9-3, excuse me. They got the head-to-head over LSU. And so I just bring it up because there is no scenario where an Alabama team that has a head-to-head win over Georgia and a win at LSU is going to be left out of the playoff. So we don't need to go on. We don't need to start talking about SEC tiebreakers and college football playoff scenarios and this and that. But if Alabama does what it's supposed to do, they're going to be 10-2. Maybe they get to Atlanta. Maybe they don't. But ultimately, they are going to make that 12-team playoff. Congrats, Bama fans. There were a lot of people, including me. I am going to take the L and say that I overreacted like a lot of other people. But Bama, you guys are going to be just fine.